Hi, this is Governor Pete Ricketts, and welcome to another episode of the Nebraska Way, where it's all about Nebraska and more. And today, I'm very excited to be able to have the 70th Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, as our guest today. So thank you very much, Secretary, for joining us.
Governor, it's great to be with you.
Well, it's great to have you here. Now, this is going to be an abbreviated version because we've got a very tight schedule for you, but we appreciate you taking the time to visit us here in Nebraska. So normally what we do is I let the person talk about their background, and we kind of go into a long, give us your history, how did you get to where you are? We don't have time for that today, okay? So I'm going to briefly hit it. So West Point grad, right? Top of your class.
I was a good student, yeah.
You're a good student, so that's a good thing. I want that in my Secretary of State.
Yes.
I want a good student. And then also you've had a very variety career, right? Obviously the military, but you've also had a career in business. You helped co-found an aerospace company. You were the president of an equipment manufacturer.
Right.
You also represented Kansas's 4th congressional district. In fact, you were in your 4th term when you were asked to become the director of the CIA and became that in January 2017. And you held that position until April 2018 when you became our 70th Secretary of State. And then you served in that role from April 2018 till January 2021. So did I get that roughly correct?
You have it all exactly right.
All right, good.
Exactly.
And so you're married to Susan.
Yes.
And you've got one son, Nick.
Nick, who's
right?
getting married in July, and we're really excited about it.
Oh, very exciting.
Yeah.
Oh, cool deal. Cool deal.
Delightful young woman named Rachel. We love her.
All right, good deal. Oh, that's really cool. So how old's Nick?
Nick is 31.
Okay, great. So, yeah, my kids are a little bit younger. We're not quite there to the marriage stage yet. I just want them to get a date. So, oops, they're probably going to watch this. It won't be a surprise. So anyway, I want to just kind of I want to jump right into the Secretary of State role, because there were a lot of things that you did as Secretary of State. I mean, when you came on the scene, you and the Trump administration really, for example, were very involved in making meaningful change in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords, which is probably the most significant peace treaty since probably the Israeli-Egyptian peace treaty, right? I mean, this is really significant stuff. Also, you were involved in helping to reestablish our relationships with key allies like Japan and South Korea, India, Australia. Also, really changing and confronting the Chinese Communist Party, changing the way we think about our naive engagement with them previously, and really calling them out for the human rights abuses, and not just China too. It was also Venezuela, Iran, Nigeria, North Korea. So really doing that as well. And then of course some significant things you did with regard to COVID and the largest repatriation of American citizens ever. So obviously a lot of things in your background here. One of the things I want to start with though is just the relationship with China. And the Chinese Communist Party in particular, because the Trump administration took a different approach to that with regard to trade, really highlighting the abuses that were costing American jobs and really threats to our freedom as well as the human rights abuses. Can you tell me a little bit about how that process happened with the Chinese Communist Party, and how should America continue to think about the Chinese Communist Party?
Yeah, that may be the most important topic.
That's why I started with that one, because I want to make sure we had enough time for that one.
And that the Chinese Communist Party truly is the only external threat to the republic that exists today. Xi Jinping, the leader there of the Chinese Communist Party, he is both the power and the intent to destroy the way we live here. Our policy developed over a relatively quick period of time. We'd watched 50 years of engagement with the idea that we'd make China more like us, and we realized they were just using our money to make us more like them. And so in the model of the Trump administration, right, we put America first. It was a conservative realism that said, we're going to require the Chinese Communist Party in China to compete in the same way we do. So whether it was trade issues, we wanted fair and reciprocal trade, whether it was the way we treated our respective diplomats. I closed a consulate in Houston, Texas, where the largest spy operation, I believe, in the history of the United States was being conducted. Whether it was the students that were studying in our schools, we began to recognize this was an enormous challenge. We suffered the virus, where there were millions of lives across the world lost as a direct result of the Chinese Communist Party's willingness to allow sick people to travel all across the world.
And hiding information about how the whole thing came about.
And continuing to hide information from the Wuhan lab, where this almost certainly came from. And we began to push back. It took a big lift to convince the world that it was time to do this. The whole world, including the United States, Republican and Democrat alike, had just ignored this. We'd turned the other cheek. Well, they stole millions of jobs from places like Nebraska and all kinds of intellectual property from great folks here in Nebraska who created businesses, and the Chinese just came and stole it. We said, nope, enough's enough. And we began to try to create that balanced relationship, which will ultimately lead the United States to continue to be able to live in a free and fair democracy.
How much an input, because obviously trade was a part of this, and you may recall that actually one of the things the Chinese tried to do was get American farmers.
Oh, I remember very
this,
well.
Right?
I've got texts from Kansas farmers, I can assure you.
Right. Well, and they tried to send out their diplomats into the heartland here.
Yes, sir.
I think they were even going to go talk to Steve Dane in Montana. And anyway, but to try and turn this around, I got to tell you, a lot of the feedback I got from farmers and ranchers is while they were not happy to see the challenges with trade go on, they were fully supportive of the policy, understanding it had to happen, because China, frankly, has been an inconsistent trade partner forever. They've never been really a great trade partner.
You bet.
How much role did you as the Secretary of State have with that as far as the trade aspects of it that might be over in Department of Commerce, for example?
So at a relatively small of the trade process itself, that was the U.S. Trade Representative Bob Lighthizer, a great Kansan who used to work for Senator Dole. But we were at the center of helping him execute and implement it and making sure that the Chinese leadership team understood what it was we were trying to do. So trade was a piece of our larger policy objective, which we were running on behalf of the president. And trade was a component of that that was largely run by Treasury and by Bob Lighthizer. But we were always in the middle of the discussion, making sure that we were all together, and we delivered a pretty cohesive, capable team to make clear to the Chinese they were going to have to change their ways.
So was there a particular conversation you recall with a Chinese diplomat or a story around this that really was an aha moment either for you or for them about how things were changing?
They could feel it from nearly the beginning. President Trump had campaigned on making sure that we took care of American manufacturing, American jobs here, and that these trade imbalances that we had with China were something that couldn't survive. I think he would use the number 500 billion. It varied from month to month, but it was a big deal. And so I think they knew from the beginning. For me, my first encounter was as a CI director with some of their senior people, and you could tell they knew we were people of a different nature. We were no longer going to kowtow to them. We were no longer going to bend the knee, and we were going to build out relationships, friendships, alliances in the region in a serious way, so that while we were doing America first, we wanted Japan to do Japan first, Australia to do Australia first, South Korea to do South Korea first, and together we would deliver outcomes that would benefit freedom, property rights, contracts, all the things that have made America so successful.
Right, which is obviously one of the things that we have in common. So even if you're Japan doing Japan first and Australia doing Australia first, the fact that we're all liberal democracies that value freedom.
Exactly right.
We got the same thing in common, which is the polar opposite of what the Chinese Communist Party is about.
Right. Well, look, in each of those nations, there's such a thing as a private company. Right. I remind people all the time, no matter who you're dealing with in a Chinese corporation, you're dealing with the Chinese government every time. And it always, people are always taken aback by that, but it's fundamentally true that if you have assets there in China today, the risk that they're expropriated is pretty darn significant. You don't own much there. You're just kind of occupying it, hanging on to it on behalf of the government.
And didn't at one point the Chinese pass a law that said that if you transmit anything electronically on their system, they own it. So if you send a sensitive document across by email, they say, "Oh, we own that now."
I remember. I'll give you a perfect example. We sent our kids to Beijing for the Olympics. I can't imagine that there was a single electronic transmission or even a private conversation that they had that is not now in the possession of the intelligence services of China. Yeah. This is a surveillance state that is of the most extraordinary proportions that I can possibly imagine. And so, yes, and they've got national security laws that just basically say at any time we want to, we can take over anything we want. This is deeply at odds with America and certainly at odds with other liberal democracies around the world as well. We should join together and get this right. And when we do, we'll be right.
So what have you seen from the Biden administration? What should the Biden administration be doing with regard to China?
So their words have been okay, but they haven't been able to muster the will to actually take on the actions that need to be taken. They haven't followed through on the trade work that we had done. They haven't followed through on the security work that we had done. They've had summits of the Quad leaders, but and now I think they are focused just on Russia with what's going on in Ukraine. And unfortunately, I don't think they understand the connection between these two. Make no mistake about it. The Chinese think this is a wonderful war. There's a reason that they haven't come out and said the Russians are wrong here. They view Russia as a vassal state and a partner, and they're going to get a lot of really cheap energy from Russia in the years ahead.
Yeah, and they can wait and see what happens here, and it doesn't cost them anything.
That's exactly right.
So speaking of Russia, you've met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2019. You also met with President Zelensky of Ukraine in 2020. What's your take on this invasion of Ukraine, and what should the United States be doing? What's the best outcome we can hope for here?
Well, the outcome we have to support is the Ukrainians winning, driving to a Russian defeat. And we can all argue about what the definition of that is, but the Ukrainians will ultimately get to make that decision. They've said they want to protect their sovereignty, every inch of real estate. We should provide them with the tools and resources in order to do that. They haven't asked for a single American soldier to come fight alongside them or a sailor to sail with them. They've simply said, sell us the stuff we need to protect ourselves. I've been in Ukraine a number of times. Once as CIA director, where we were training, the CIA was training Ukrainian Special Forces operators. I pray that the work we did helped them in the successes that we've seen to date in and around Kyiv. We gave them the tactics and training I think they needed to do just that. It's been stunning to watch the Biden administration simply be slow and late and small.
It seems that's exactly what it seems like.
Reactive, if
it's
you
like
will. Yeah.
Head in the right direction. It just seems like a step slow on everything, just a little bit too late.
No, that's exactly right. And they still are. This is you talked about the resolution. Putin's not going to change.
Yeah.
He was the same guy when we were there that he is today. His perception of risk is simply different. When President Trump and I left, he thought he could move about the cabin freely. We need to make sure that he understands that we will continue to support the Ukrainians so long as he continues his assault on Europe.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of people, and nobody believes that if President Trump was still in office that Putin's invading.
It seems very unlikely to me.
Yeah. So from here, is the outcome then trying to get Russia out of those, or is this following Ukraine's lead on this? And what more can the United States be doing?
My sense is that President Zelensky wants the Russians out of his country, and he's going to continue to push as long and as hard as he can. And we should provide him the resources to do that. We always think about tactical things, howitzers and ammunition and javelins and defense systems. Those are great. We should make sure we provide him with the air defense systems to protect civilian populations as well. So think less about advancing militarily, more about preventing Russian artillery and airplanes from striking train stations, killing dozens and dozens of Ukrainian kids. Right. These are tragedies that we could help the Ukrainians be able to prevent this week, next week, and 5 years from now as well. There's so much more that we could do, and there is so much more that the Europeans could do. I still think a central tragedy in this is that the Europeans refused to listen to us when we told them that if you're dependent on Russian energy, you'll someday be in a really bad place. We didn't predict when. It could have been 10 years from now. But you see today the French and the Germans are underwriting the slaughter of Ukrainian kids by still purchasing European energy because they don't have an alternative solution. Yeah. And we could do more. We could produce American energy from places like Kansas and Nebraska and all across America and help the Europeans wean themselves from this Russian problem.
And did you have conversations with the European powers about this?
I can't tell you how many times, including with the current chancellor, Olaf Scholz, who was the finance minister when I was a Secretary of State in Germany. He worked for Chancellor Merkel as her treasury minister, essentially. And I would say, Minister Scholz, you all are going to build this Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and the Russians are going to own you in a crisis. Yeah. And he would say, but we don't have any choice, essentially. That he would not quite that way. They had a choice, and they made a bad one. And
build LNG facilities. Start importing from us.
They're now paying the price for that themselves with really high. We've got high energy prices here in the States. They've got really, really high prices. And second, they know it's deeply immoral. The fact that they're purchasing Russian energy, helping prop up the ruble while this fight is going on.
So does there need to be a new Cold War against Russia? Isolate them like we did previously after the Iron Curtain fell?
My sense is the world is going that way. My sense that you are seeing emerging blocs, China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, probably Venezuela and Cuba as well, and the rest of the Western democracies join together, not to form a new liberal order, but to reinforce the historic relationships about how we treat other nations as independent and sovereign, and we respect property rights.
Yeah, unprovoked aggressions like invading your neighbors is not going to be tolerated.
Exactly right. It's across the line, and we're going to do everything we can to prevent it.
Right. Well, let's talk about this Biden administration now. For 15 months, they have stumbled from one disaster to the next. The disastrous pullout of Afghanistan, highest inflation we've had in 40 years. War in Europe, we were just talking about. Southern border, where literally millions of illegal immigrants are crossing the border. What is the Biden administration doing wrong? What do they need to do? Like, what do you see is going on here that just seems like they just don't have a coherent policy?
You walk through that list, and it's hard to imagine how quickly they've unraveled the work that had been amassed, not just by the Trump administration, but by great governors all across America. We'd collectively delivered really good outcomes for the people that we were tasked to lead, and they've just undone so much of it. You know, I think Governor at the end, they have a different conception of the country, and a different conception of the American people than we did. We respected them. We said they can make good decisions about COVID and how to deal with it. We said that they can make good decisions about how their business would run. They're gonna keep our air clean and our water safe. And they didn't feel like we needed to drive this all from Washington D.C. And then they have this radical idea about open borders too. We know this is the most generous nation in the world, and we know that we're a nation of immigrants. But goodness gracious, allowing 10 or 15,000 illegals into our country every day, and the drugs that will come alongside it, and the human trafficking that comes along, these fundamentally misunderstand America. When you hear them talk about the 1619 Project and the fact that we were founded on a racist idea, that should give you some indication of how they don't view this country as exceptional and neat and with whatever flaws, a great place. And I think that drives their policies that you see.
Yeah. Well, you talk about the drugs, obviously as a governor, pretty far away from the border, smack dab here in the middle of the country, we see that impact here. We had, last year, the Omaha DEA, confiscates fentanyl. Just this year so far, they've confiscated 26 kilograms of fentanyl, which is 10 times more than they did last year. And just this month, like 100,000 pills, counterfeit pills laced with fentanyl. And we've had overdose deaths because of this, because young people were taking these pills, and it's just horrible. Moms dying and leaving kids behind, literally, because of the unrestricted flow that's going across. I was actually down at the border last October, and the folks down there were telling us about how the coyotes are smart. They're going to push through a bunch of illegal immigrants in one spot and then run the drugs in another spot when they know our attention is drawn away.
You bet. No, they're pretty sophisticated players. Look, we've all suffered in Kansas, at least I'll speak for Kansas. I know it so well. We suffered meth, then the opioid crisis, and now this fentanyl crisis. And you've got to secure that border to at the very least raise the price for these things and make the coyotes suffer as a result of that good hard work.
Yeah. Well, I might point out that the policies the Trump administration put in place brought illegal crossings to a 40-year low.
We worked at it. The president campaigned on it, and he looked at every one of his cabinet members and said, "Make it happen." And it took us about a year and a half to get it right, and we did. Yeah.
All right, we've got just a couple minutes left. Is there anything that we didn't hit upon? There's probably a lot of things we didn't hit upon. Is there anything you want to highlight about your time as Secretary of State or CIA director or anything else in your career, just to kind of reflect upon as part of the podcast here?
Only this. We talk about these national security matters as if they are separate from domestic matters. But one thing I think that the Ukraine war has made clear is that the world is so deeply connected. When Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine, the price of red winter wheat skyrockets, right? And natural gas, right? So fertilizer, think ammonium hydrate. These are things that really impact us. We have to be strong here at home and get our economy right here at home. And when we do, we can then be a leader in the world. And when we get that right across the world, we can then make sure that we don't have the instability overseas that drives bad outcomes for the American people.
Yeah, no, I like how you talked about that, because I think about energy policy and how in the Trump administration we became energy independent. We were selling energy to our allies. And now the Biden administration solution is, well, let's go get Iran and Venezuela, our enemies, to produce more oil.
It's nutty.
What are you thinking? I mean, if we can be the ones selling energy to Europe, for example, how does that change the whole security situation for Ukraine? I mean,
it changes it radically. When I think about energy, there were very few meetings that I had, hundreds of meetings in those two roles. And energy was the top of every foreign leader's idea, because they've got to turn the lights on for their own people. And they would much prefer to buy it from a stable country like the United States of America rather than an unreliable partner like the Russians.
Well, and if you care about the environment, who's going to do a better job than us, right? We have the most strict environmental laws of any country in the world when it comes to energy development. We're going to do it better. If you're going to push that off to Iran or Venezuela, do you think they're going to look out for the environment? No way.
No one believes that for a moment. Yeah. The Chinese aren't going to shut down a single coal-fired power plant because of the Paris Climate Accords. It is sheer folly.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Secretary, thank you so much for spending a few minutes with us here today to talk about some of these great issues. Really appreciate that you took some time for us. And so here on the Nebraska Way, you can follow me, Twitter handle @GovRicketts. We're on Facebook, Instagram. please go on and give us a nice 5-star rating. You know, love to always get those. Pete.Ricketts@Nebraska.gov if you want to email my office. And Secretary, I know that now you're a fellow at the Hudson Institute, right?
Yes, sir.
You've also started your own PAC, the
I've
Champion
started a
American
PAC called
Values
CAVPAC. You can go see it at cavpac.com, CAVPAC.com. We are helping candidates all across America be successful in November to begin to reclaim our nation.
All right, great. Anyone else somebody can follow you? You want somebody to?
At Mike Pompeo is my personal Twitter handle, and you can see my son's handiwork there.
All right, great. Well, hey, thank you very much for joining us again, and thank you all for joining us for another episode of The Nebraska Way.
Paid for by Pete Ricketts for Governor, 1610 N Street, Suite 100, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68508.